Hi, I'm James, and this is a video on Japanese poetry traditions. So, you want to learn about Japanese poetry. Here's all the stuff I've learned so far. What is Japanese poetry? Poetry, by definition, is literature that uses devices to change meaning and evoke emotion. Japanese poetry is poetry that originates from Japan. Traditions of Japanese poetry are the styles and methods applied. So where did Japanese poetry originate from? It is said that Japanese poetry was inspired by the Chinese poetry known as kanshi in the 6th century. In Chinese courts, poetry was an indicator of an educated individual. The trend became very popular and was used as intellectual currency to Chinese diplomats by the Japanese upper class. Japanese poetry originated around the late 7th century with an era known as the Heian period. In this period, aristocrats composed poetry as a form of high culture. At the time, sensitivity was viewed as noble and an era of enlightenment ushered in. So what are Japanese poetry traditions? There are many types of Japanese poetry. The most popular are known as the haiku, the renga, and the katauta and seroka. Poetry from 794 CE was once labeled all as waka, ancient poetry. The term waka has adopted a new modern name, which is called tanka, which we define today as short, non-rhyming poems. Okay, so here's a timeline of the Japanese poetry. You have kanshi in 600 CE, which was the early Chinese poetry, and is followed by the waka in 794, which is known as tanka, formerly known as waka, if you will. Okay, then in the 1300 CE, you have the collaborative poetry known as renga. And then finally, in the 1600s, you have the modern and contemporary styles. Okay, so here's some details behind each style. Tradition 1 is known as the haiku. The haiku is a poem that typically consists of seasonal feelings and may contain something called a kigo, which is a word associated with the season. Haikus must follow the 575 syllable pattern and only have 3 lines. Okay, here's an example of a haiku. Okay, an old silent pond. A frog jumps into the pond. Splash. Silence again. Here's another one. Oh, snail, climb Mount Fuji, but slowly, slowly. Tradition number 2 is known as the renga. The renga's weird because haikus originated from the renga. Normally, a renga starts off with a haiku and then it has a collaboration with another poet and they go in an even order. So the way it goes is it'll start as a haiku and then line 1 will go poet A and then line 2 will go poet B, line 3 poet A, line 4 poet B, etc. Finally, tradition number 3 is the katauta and the seroka, which are love poems. The katauta is known as an incomplete version, as it is a poem addressing a lover for their response. The seroka is known as the response poem, which is composed of 2 katauta verses. Although it's often used in a romantic sense in the past, serokas are generally used to depict multiple perspectives of a subject and may not relate to romance at all. So here are 2 examples. One example of which is a past seroka. We lie neath the oak on a carpet of brown leaves that lost their amber glory. And then you have the response, which would say, with eyes tightly shut, we envision spring's return, hoping our love does the same. So that's a past love seroka. Now, here's the modern version. Zealous, vibrant youth, flaming ablaze with aging, slowly burning ashes. Now you have the different perspective of aging. Now senile decay, only to lament over memory of begone youth. Okay, so there are other types of Japanese poetry. For some reason, the theme of renaming terms throughout history is very prevalent in Japanese poetry. Many of the main traditions I spoke about have different alternate names slash forms with little nuances. One example is the choka. So the choka is just a long waka. It's just a long poem. The short poems that I covered are known as tanka. So yeah, this is just the long version, and it went extinct due to less popularity throughout the centuries. Okay, so next you have the haikai and the hoku. Now these are just past names of the haiku, except in the poems they had more focus on seasonal themes. And finally, you have what people call the renku and the renge. Now again, these are just alternate names for the renga. You know, for example, the renge it was created around the 1800s by an American named Gary Gay. And because he was so popular with his renga poetry, people decided to add his name into the term. So that's why it's called renge. But, it's solely because, there's so many years. This poetry has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. So throughout those time periods, you're gonna get alternate names along the way. It's just par for the course. So yeah. Now, I have to say, after reading a few poems, I gotta say, I'm not really a huge fan of this medium. I write a lot myself, but none of the poems that I've read have really captivated me. All the poems seem to follow strict rules and syllable guidelines, which I find hard to invest in something so short and strict. The format doesn't allow for proper expression, as saying more with less is a philosophy that wakas slash tankas force its members to subscribe to. Personally, I enjoy expressing myself in writing without restrictions. I respect those who have the ability to be this concise with expression, and honestly, I could really learn a lot through practicing this method. So yeah, that's pretty much it.